Well, welcome to Making the Most of Your Household Freezer. My name is Dana Parfitt. I live here locally, right, literally across the street, very local. So we're going to jump right in. Tonight, the whole topic of tonight is making the most of your freezer, and whatever freezer you have, you can do a lot with it. So the main thing, the first freezer basics is what I'm going to cover. And we all know a freezer is a unit that's going to keep food cold, but it's got to stay at certain temperatures to be considered safe. You want your freezer to be at 0 degrees to -20. That's the optimal freezer space time. If you've got an older type of freezer, you might want to invest in any type of a thermometer that's going to measure it, because then you can test it every now and again, making sure you're right. A lot of the newer appliances have thermometers built in. If you've got a newer refrigerator, most of them have them like right at the top. It'll tell you the temperatures in the freezer and in the refrigerator, and you can adjust them up and down. But you want to make sure you stay in that cold zone for freezing food. So I want to talk about a couple of different freezers, because we all probably have different things. Some people are going to have what I call your standard old-fashioned refrigerator that's got a freezer box of some type at the top. One we all had when we were growing up as kids. It's the old one you know you had when you lived in your first apartment. It's got that little freezer. And maybe you think there's not much you can do with that. If you organize and maximize your space, you can make a lot happen in that little freezer. If you're fortunate enough to have a bigger freezer, you might have one of the newer ones that has a drawer that pulls out in the bottom, that then sometimes looks like the bottomless pit and everything just kind of piles in there and you don't know what's in there anymore, and you open it and think, oh my God, I have no clue what's there and how am I going to find it? We're going to organize it. Those freezers are really great. Some of them have drawers and organizers already. They might work for you. They might need to be changed out. Then you've got your side-by-sides, which you've got your refrigerator on one side and your freezer on the other. Those have a lot of shelves. The thing to know about any freezer, be it a standalone freezer or the side-by-side refrigerators, every time you open that door, you're letting warm air into everything. So you want to make sure that that temperature is checked in that type of a freezer, because it's not just that the top gets a little warm, everything gets warm air every time you're opening and closing. So check your temperatures there. Then a lot of people have a chest freezer of one type or another that looks like a box. They can be as little as 3 to 5 cubic feet, which is kind of like the size of a dishwasher, to being large ones the size of this table that you could put someone in and they could stay for a long time. But that's, we have lots of different varieties. The good news now is secondary chest type freezers, the prices have come down greatly in small ones. You can get a standard small 5 cubic foot freezer, which is, a box that's a good size. You can do a lot with it for a family, and you can get those for about $150 through Walmart and Lowe's, Home Depot, and all the other places like that. And they go on sale from time to time for even cheaper. Those lovely big gigantic things that you might fit in your basement or your garage, those can range as high as $700. If you've got space for something big and gigantic and you know you're going to use it, it's the greatest investment you can ever make for your food storage, especially if you're a gardener and you grow a lot of food, because where are you putting it all? You're either canning it if you've come to other classes, or you're going to be freezing it. So a freezer is a great investment, and it lasts a lifetime. And when I say a lifetime, I can tell you truly, I have a chest freezer in my basement that is, I believe it's a 6 cubic foot, so it's not huge, but it's a nice box freezer. I bought it when my youngest child was a newborn baby, and that child just turned 40 this year. And that freezer is still going. And I scraped and saved and pinched my pennies and thought it was the most expensive thing I had ever bought. 40 years later, it still won't die. It's going wonderfully. So it was the best investment ever. And I can tell you it was Kenmore, and we all know Sears used to last forever. So it's still going. And now the running joke is, who's going to last longer, my daughter or the freezer? So, but it is a great investment. And if you've got space for a freezer, I suggest you always get one. So then that's the next question. If you purchase a freezer, where are you going to put it? Some people put their freezer in the garage. That's okay if your garage doesn't freeze, because you don't want the outside of the freezer to freeze. You only want the inside of the freezer to freeze. My freezer's in my basement. I own a secondary freezer that's very big, and that's in my daughter's basement because I don't have room for that one in my freezer. So that's our community freezer that we use for the whole family. You can put a small freezer in your spare bedroom, in your dining room. They don't take up a lot of space, and the nice thing is it's a countertop. You can use it for other things. So it's great. So if you don't have a secondary freezer, think about that, but also think about whether it meets your needs or it doesn't. Let's see. So is a freezer the best source of storing food? It's going to depend on what you're storing. I have my eggplant story that one year I grew a lot of eggplant, which wasn't a smart thing on my part because I'm the only one in my house who eats eggplant. So then I had all this eggplant. I was giving away eggplant to people. Eggplant just kept coming and coming. Well, eggplant doesn't really freeze great unless you prepare it as a dish. Well, you can only make so much eggplant parmesan and put in your freezer before it becomes, who will ever eat this? If you freeze eggplant by itself, it kind of gets very mushy and clumpy. It's good if you're going to use it in a dish, you're going to blend it up and make it mushy, but if not, it's not worth freezing. You're better off to either dehydrate that eggplant or find more people who want to eat that eggplant. But in my case, I never grew a large amount of eggplant ever again. I learned my lesson. And there are other foods that you will find that are not freezable. And in the handouts that you have, we're going to go through those at the moment, the very starting off of your handout, I've got some online resources for you where you can find more information on freezer food safety and freezer tips, tricks, all types of things. There are some pieces for display out at the back that are a few sample articles from a few of these online resources. They're very good reading, and there's one article that's really interesting that's what happens if the power goes out. How long can food stay in your freezer, and how do you handle that? And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. The next thing, if you turn to page 2 at the bottom, is the list of things not to freeze. So while a lot of foods freeze really fantastic, green beans are like fabulous food in the freezer. To me, they're like heaven. But I wouldn't put cucumbers in the freezer because they turn to watery mush. So there are things definitely that freezing is not the right answer for. So think about the foods that you might grow in your garden or that you want to stock up on, and then decide whether you really want a big freezer, you want a medium freezer, what's going to work for you based on what you plan to store in it. So the goal of freezer storage is to keep your food safe and usable for an extended period of time. The goal is not to keep that food forever in your freezer. It will not last a lifetime in your freezer. So you have to keep track of what's in there. And if you've been to some of my other classes, you know that means you have to organize. Whether you like it or not, you gotta know what you've got in that freezer, because it quickly becomes, you put something in there, it got lost, it changed its color or shape, and now it's like, what is it, and how do I know it? And then you might just end up taking it out and saying, I don't know what it is, I'm throwing it out. Well, that's your money you're throwing out, and you don't want to be wasting it. So you've got to keep track of what you've got in your freezer. Once a month, I take a quick look through my freezer, making sure I know what's still there, what's not there, so that I'm not at that point where it's like, that's mystery meat and it's going in the trash. We need to make sure. So that's the first thing you have to do. The other thing is you've got to make sure you label everything. Some labels don't work well in freezers because the glue on them gets cold and then they just peel off. So then you end up with a pile of labels in the bottom of your freezer and a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't have labels on it. This is my labeling system. It's cheap and economical. Comes in many colors. I don't recommend yellows and very light fluorescent colors because after they've been in the frost, they can't be seen. I go with black, brown, dark blue. Those are my colors. It works. I label everything, and what I label on it is, what's the name of that product? I don't just write that it's chicken. I write whether it's cooked chicken or it's raw chicken because I have both in my freezer. I label what type of chicken. it's chicken breast, it's chicken thighs. That way I know exactly what I'm pulling out when I'm in a rush to grab something. And then I always put a date on it. I use a date that's just the month and the year. I don't care what day of the week it actually was. I just need to know. I put that in there in February, and now I'm at December, and I should think about, I really should start using that. So that's always label things, because if not, especially if you have kids, they're going to go down there and say, oh yeah, I think this is what it is. And no, it's not. You don't want to all of a sudden have a roast thawed out when, you know, you really were looking for a pound of ground beef. So, and ground beef is one of those things that once it's frozen, kind of looks like a few other things. Is that ground beef? Is it ground turkey? Is it ground chicken? Is that ground beef cooked or is it raw? So labeling is the most important thing in your freezer, because that's going to help you to use things in your freezer, is by having them labeled. So when we're talking about food safety and the fact that it's going to go into your freezer and it's going to go in this cold, cold temperature where it's going to become a solid mass, there are two things that affect food in your freezer. One is enzymes. We get into the science of it. All food has enzymes in it, and from the moment you pick those green beans off of the vine, the enzyme starts to move faster and the product starts to deteriorate. So the sooner you use it, the better. Same for freezing. The sooner you freeze it, the better. Once you get to that 0 temperature mark, those enzymes stop, but they don't go away. They just freeze. So when you take that food out of the freezer, you have a small window before those enzymes get active again and start deteriorating that food. But while it's frozen at 0 temperature or colder, those enzymes are going to sit dormant. But once you take it out and thaw it, those guys are active, so you can't put it in your refrigerator and leave it for 5 days and then cook it. It's not going to be great. Those enzymes are going to be charged and ready to roll. The other thing that happens to food is freezer burn. Freezer burn can't hurt you, but it tastes awful and looks horrible. Food that has a little bit of freezer burn on the edges can be trimmed off and still cooked, eaten, used. You get ice crystals. Those won't hurt you either, but sometimes they just take blah and bland and make the food taste awful. So the thing you want to avoid is getting freezer burn and creating ice crystals. So we are going to go over those in a couple of minutes. When you have your freezer, the first rule is don't stuff every inch of your freezer till you can barely shut the door, because then you're creating no space for some good cold air to move around. It needs to have a little space inside the freezer. So when your freezer starts filling up and you're thinking, I don't have any more room, then you've got to make a plan for cooking that food or using it in some other way, or moving it to another freezer or another space, because you don't want it so packed that you can't move around in there. Your food needs to have airspace in the freezer, or it just doesn't work well. And I have to say, my mother was one of those, stuff it all in there until you could barely shut the door and hope for the best. It didn't always go well. So yeah, it did not. Let's see. And the other thing is, most newer freezers kind of keep the frost at bay, but some of the older freezers, you'll open it one day and it's like, oh my gosh, there's this huge lump of ice in there. What do I do with it? Well, you take your pizza spatula and you just kind of tap away at it. It should break right out. But you want to get that ice chunk out as fast as you can, because it's taking up space in your freezer. And the ice, because of the chemicals that are used to keep the freezer cool on the outside, they travel in the air, and that ice will absorb those, and it'll make your freezer smell, and it can make some foods kind of have that absorbed smell of, ooh, where was this? When it's still good food, but it has just kind of a bad odor. So you always want to keep that extra ice out of your freezer anytime you can. So always check on that. So now I'm going to talk about some tools for freezing. Let's see, we're going to start on this end. Oh, we're going to talk about books first, then we'll go to the food. So if you've been to some of the other programs, you know, I like books that are always safe. And this has been a sign that everyone who's come to any of the canning classes has seen what seems like a million times. But this is the government agency that gives us safety information and safety guidelines for food. And it's all about preserving. And preserving covers canning, dehydrating, fermenting, freezing, all ways that you save food. So they have freezing resources on their website, and their address is on your resources. The same as these canning books, which are safe and proven tested recipes, they all, because they say preserving, they have a section on freezing in them. And it's got great information. I think it's this one here. Let's see. It's got great information on freezing. They have recipes for food that you can freeze, different tips and techniques. I'm tongue-tied tonight. On what products to use. This one here had, I think, the best freezer chart in it. This has a whole chart on, you come down the side, it's what food is it that I'm going to freeze, and what's the best way to freeze it. And it's a quick, easy chart, and then it's got more information on freezing. So when you think of this book as a canning book, it's a preserving book. It's a book for saving food, and that's what you want to do. You don't want to be wasting your food. You want to be able to save it. There are also books that are specifically on freezing, but if you already have canning books, check your canning books that you have at home to see if they have a freezing section in them. Don't invest in another book if you've already got something that's working. This has lots of great recipes for making foods and freezing them ahead of time. This is the book that's by the Extension Service. We, because we're not a farming state, don't really have an extension service, but all of the other states that do a lot of agriculture have college extension services where they study food, they test food safety, and they will have tons of great information and recipes. This is the one that the government recommends from the Extension Service, and it's got a huge section in here on freezing, goes for a good chunk, and it tells you how to freeze every single food and what not to freeze on every single food and the best ways to do it. So all of those are really great resources. These 3 books the library has here on hand for you to check out. This book they might have, I did not check that one yet. It is a newer book, but definitely feel free afterwards to take a look at them, snap some pictures if you're interested in them. They're good resources, and they're all safe recipes, and that's the only kind that I'm ever going to tell any about is something that's safe. So you can put food into any kind of container that you feel comfortable with if it works for you. If a container like this is too big for the space you have to freeze, then you want to think about something that's smaller or that works for you. Or if you've got some leftover food you want to put in the freezer and this just isn't big enough, then you need to think of other options. But ultimately, plastic containers come in a million different sizes. We know that. You can buy them everywhere. You can get them everywhere. The thing you need to make sure is, does your lid stay on place when you do this? If it doesn't, it's going to come off in the freezer right away. So how much food do you put into a container if you're putting it into a container? You always need a little bit of headspace because, again, the science of freezing, things expand when they freeze. So you have to take that piece into consideration. That's the one big thing with freezing milk. You can't just throw a gallon of milk into your freezer, or you're going to have this bubbled up jug that's going to end up cracking, and then when you take it out, you'll have milk leaking all over the place, and it becomes to the point, why did I do that? Now I can't even use it. So if you're going to freeze milk in a container, make sure you pour out about this much. Then pour, and when I say pour it out, I don't mean to pour it down the drain. I mean pour it out into a glass and use it for something else. We'll clarify that. We're not wasting that milk. And then put your top back on and put it into the freezer. And that's the same in any type of container. Make sure you have some expansion room. These are just regular soup kind of containers that you might get from McQuaid's or the Chinese food store. Anywhere else, you can save those and use those for freezing. I do not use these for freezing because they take up more space than I want in my freezer. But these are perfectly fine. You can use those types of things, especially if you're going to freeze something that later you want to take out and have for your lunch at work. It's great. Then you can throw the container away. If it gets cracked, it's nothing, no great investment. This is a container that we're going to talk about in a little bit that I use for quick freezing. It's a squishy, rubbery, silicone type of a container. And I cook with buttermilk for different things, but I always end up having buttermilk left over and then no plan to use it for a while. So I pop it into this container here. I put it into the freezer. As soon as it's solid, I then pop it out because this has measurements on it. So it tells me I've got a half a cup, a 1 cup. So then I pop it out and put it into a Ziploc bag, and I write that this is buttermilk. I put it in there at this time. And I might have 2 or 3 ice cube looking clumps of buttermilk that then later on I can quickly take one out and freeze and thaw it for when I just need that one little bit of item. These are great for doing soups in the same way. Any other kind of liquids that you know, I need a cup of this. I make my lemon pound cake, and I always use a cup of lemon juice, which is a lot in a pound cake, but that's okay. You could freeze it in that quantity and then later have it to use. They're good for freezing lots of different things in. Silicone containers are really great for freezing in general because they've got that squish. A lot of people use canning jars for freezing. You will see on your handout the only canning jar sizes that are ball recommended for freezing are these here, which are all small sizes. There's one other one that's a little taller than this that I just totally forgot to bring. But they're small containers, and it's the same thing. You've got to make sure they have head space because things are going to expand and your lid will pop off. I don't freeze in these type of containers either because they just, in my opinion, take up too much space. The only thing I can tell you I do keep in my freezer in a canning jar like this. I'm from the South, and I have a special order of grits that I order online, and they store better in the freezer. They'll stay fresher. So I have my special grits in a container in the freezer like this. But for anything else, I don't use the glass because for me, all of these containers take up more space than what I want to give up. Freezer space is like prime real estate to me, and I want to maximize it any way I can. So then the question would be, so what do I do? Well, there are 2 types of freezing in general when you're looking at storing. You're freezing in bulk, which means you're freezing a pound of hamburger meat. You're freezing a chicken breast. You're freezing something that is in a large quantity or a designated quantity. Then you've got things that are going to be quick use type of foods, such as my grandson goes on a spell where he really likes to eat hot dogs, but he eats one of them at a time. So we don't keep hot dogs in the refrigerator. I keep them in the freezer, but I do what's called fast freezing them. So that to fast freeze something, you're going to take a baking sheet that fits into your space. So if this is too big to put in your freezer, don't use this size. Use one that fits in your size. And you got to consider that before you've gone to the trouble of setting it up. You got to make sure it fits in there. So you're going to take your pan, you're going to cover it with some parchment paper. You're going to cover that. You're going to put your hot dogs, your meatballs, whatever items you want to freeze as individual. You pop it into the freezer. When they are totally hard, then you're going to take them out and you're going to put them into a Ziploc bag and zip them up, because then they're individually frozen, where now he can take his one hot dog out, throw it in the microwave, and he's a happy camper. And for that, then I write on there that they're hot dogs, they're meatballs, whatever they are, and they're in there in his zone of the freezer where he knows that's his fast fix food and he's got it. It's also a great way to freeze berries, like right now blueberries and strawberries and those things are all out there. You can freeze them on a sheet so that they'll still roll all around when they're frozen. And it's great because then if you've got a bag of them in your freezer, just take your scoop and scoop out whatever you want to throw into your oatmeal, your yogurt, into a smoothie, anything else. It's not this big clump of a solid mound of blueberries that if you wait for them to thaw, then they might be all squishy and mushy because they were all a big mound. So fast freezing is something that's good for things that you're going to be taking out in small individual quantities. And that's a really great thing if you live by yourself or if there's only 2 of you. You can buy still a large pack of something and then refreeze it into small containers that you can just take out what you want when you need it. That makes it much easier for a lot of things. And you can still get the bargain price of buying it in a bulk quantity. Other ways to freeze. A lot of people are adverse to using plastics and papers in their freezer. You can use resealable silicone type bags. You can use beeswax paper, those types of things. For the long run on freezing, they still will get air in them. And that's kind of your goal. You want to have as little air as possible, with the exception of your headspace, because your headspace is going to grow and it's going to get the air out itself. But when you're looking at, if you're freezing, and now, if you haven't seen these gadgets before, this is a bag holder. This is your friend for many, many things if you're in the kitchen alone. If you've got other people to hold that bag for you, then you're good, you're golden. But if you're by yourself, you can take your Ziploc bag or any other type of freezer bag, and it's going to hold it right on here. You're just clipping it. You can adjust the size for small bags, for large bags. You can buy these. I've seen these at Walmart and Target from time to time. You can also buy them online in multiple quantities, so that if you like to make freezer meals for yourself and you want to set up an assembly line, you could have 6 or 7 bags that you're putting things into at one time. And those are great because it's like the best pair of hands ever. It's wonderful for liquids, because pouring liquids into a bag that's jiggling and you're trying to hold it, that's not always safe and easy, especially if it's a warmer liquid. So, and that reminds me of, we don't put hot food in our freezer ever. So if you did it before, you're not going to do it again, you're going to be good. Because if you put hot food into the freezer, you're now warming up all the stuff you've got in the freezer. You're changing the temperature by having warm food. So you can cool your food in the refrigerator if you need to, or just let it sit for a short amount of time to get that steam down and cooled. Then you're going to put it away. So ice cube trays. Most of us don't have these anymore. Most people have ice makers on everything. They still do sell ice trays, and ice trays are a great tool in the kitchen. If you grow herbs in your garden, you can freeze herbs in ice trays. You can freeze them in water, or you can put them into olive oil or into butter. Think about how you plan to use those herbs when you take them out. Put them in whatever liquid you plan to use later, so that then you can just take out that frozen cube and drop it right into whatever you're cooking. Same kind of thing. You're going to put your herbs in here. Once they're frozen, you're going to pop them right out and put them into a bag that you can open and close whenever you need to. Make sure you label them, because later down the line, when you're really desperately hoping that it's rosemary and it turns out to be thyme, you're not disappointed. And the one time I had one that got loose, it was basil when I was really not looking for basil. So make sure you label them. That's an important piece. You can also freeze other types of things in here. If you have small children who like small snack type of things, you can do that, baby foods. If you're looking, a lot of people make compound butters, which is a butter that you mix with herbs and spices. And again, if you're growing your own herbs, you want to make a compound butter that's got chives and basil and maybe garlic. You're going to mix that together. You can then freeze it in butter in individual containers, and it's perfect. You then can grab one and throw it into your pasta dish that you're cooking or anything else. It's a great time saver, and it'll last forever in your freezer, really. So, and that's another thing. Somebody asks me all the time, how long does stuff last? If you go to the very last page of your handout, this last section of handout is from the food safety website. And when it says the freezer storage chart right at the top, their note says, freezer storage is for quality only. Frozen foods remain safe indefinitely. So as long as your freezer has stayed at its 0 mark and it doesn't have frostbite, your food's going to stay good. They might say it's recommended to be there for 12 months or 6 months. That food's going to last a whole lot longer. Do not feel you have to rush to take it out or move it along. As long as you're sealing it properly and keeping it at that temperature, it's going to last in your freezer a good long time. If you take it out of the freezer and you don't like the sight of it, the smell of it, okay, so maybe it didn't last as long as what you really wanted it to. But for the most part, if you're doing it correctly, it's going to stay for a good long time. Let's see, what else is on my list to talk to you about tonight? All right. The other thing for how to save your food, and Kristen, if I could have you get that food from there, would be good, this is a food saver. It's a food sealer. They come in different brands, different varieties. They come in small sizes, large sizes. And basically, it's a vacuum sealer just like they use at the grocery stores, where it sucks the air out of your food and vacuum seals it up. They come in tons of different price ranges because they can come in very small ones to very large ones, fancy ones that have cutters in there that it can do all kind of bells and whistles. Basic is fine, and they last a good long time. And you will see if you, thank you, darling. This is my daughter-in-law who comes along as my wonderful helper, and she's fantastic and a really terrific daughter-in-law. So don't let anyone tell you that mother-in-laws are all bad, because they have good daughter-in-laws too. So if you go to Walmart, you'll see they sell in a variety of sealer bags. They can be really expensive. You can order them online for really inexpensive. And these here, this box here, they come in two sizes. They come in an 8-inch wide and an 11-inch wide. So you can do a lot of different things with them. This particular box has a built-in cutter, so I can pull my bag out, I can cut it, seal it in there. These are fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And that's what I'm going to show and tell now about this. So a sealer bag is just that. It seals it all up. This is a chicken breast. Now, when you look at it like this, maybe you don't know it's a chicken breast. But right on here, it tells me this is one breast, and I put it in the freezer 1022. So it's all sealed up. It has very little air in here. It's got a little here in this little pocket right here. And the reason I list one breast is because I have a family of 4. So I package chicken like this, because this is the most popular meat in my house. I package chicken in 1 breast quantities, 2 breast quantities, and 3 breast quantities, because that's what I use with different meals and different times. So I always label how many I have, because once it's all squished together, 2 sometimes can look like 3, and 3 can sometimes look like 2, and maybe I don't want that extra one out right now. So I always seal them, and I do more in the single packs than anything else, because that just seems to work better for us. But this will stay terrific like this for a long time. I have things sealed in my freezer that I've had for over 2 years, and they're still perfect and great and wonderful. So a classic example of, do you know what this is? What do you think? Ham. You are right. This is leftover ham, and it says 4/23. So if Easter was in April this year, this is leftover from Easter. But later down the line, would I really know that it's ham? That's the importance of labeling. So I wrote on here, it's sliced ham, 4/23. Because I wrote sliced ham, I know this has already been cooked, it's a leftover item. But that's plenty for a meal at my house. So I have that in there. Here's an example of something I do freeze in this type of container. Now, you've all had this container come to your house at some point or another. So it's capable of being reused. This is brownies in here. It says freezer because the child that I said, write the label on this and take it to the freezer, wrote freezer. So when you're looking for helpers to write your labels, be very specific on what you tell them. So these are brownies. I know that they were put in there within the last 2 months because that was when we made brownies. However, this doesn't have a date because freezer is all that got written on this one. But this is a great thing. Leftovers can go light like this, and it's quick and easy that then I can take them out and the kid can have them later. Here's an example of something that was put into a freezer bag, just a regular Ziploc bag. Can you tell what it is? What do you think?
Chicken carcass. Yeah.
Correct. It's a chicken carcass to make stock with. It has no label because it got thrown in there very quickly with the plan that 2 days later it was going to become stock. It's still here, and it's going to become stock next week. But I do have these mysteries now and again. And here's my last example of the freezer deal. So now this is a New York strip steak. They were put in there in 5/23. There's 2 of them in there. And you can see they're hard as a rock. They won't move. They won't bend. That's what you want for your freezer food. You want it to be solid all the time. And you can see it has practically no air. Looks a lot like a package that you might buy from a company that's all sealed up. That's what this kind of machine can do for you. And the best thing is no matter what size of freezer you have, you can stand things up, you can stack things all different ways. It saves a lot more space than that type of a thing. So that those can go back into, yes, that's what I'm going to do. This one can go back in the freezer. So you can freeze liquids in this sealer machine as well, so that you can have soup that is flat, you can have broth that's flat, and then you can stand them all up into your freezer, taking up a lot less space. So that's where this, I feel, is the best freezer tool. But you use whatever can work for you, whatever you like, whatever you don't like, don't use it, don't do it. The biggest tool to keep next to your freezer, rubber garden gloves. It gets cold in the freezer. And when you really need to find out what's at the bottom of your freezer, you're going to quit before you get to the bottom of the freezer if you don't wear freezer gloves. And these, you can see, are my old gloves that were falling apart in the yard. So they went through the washing machine, and now they live next to my freezer. So that anytime I go down there to look for something and to hunt for what's in the very bottom and make sure I didn't lose anything or leave something, I've got my gloves on and I'm there and I'm good to stay there and find out everything and reorganize. So how do you organize your freezer? Well, you use containers. This bag is a perfect bag that I use into my chest freezer. And what I do with this type of bag, and the reason I use these types of bags, they will not get frost on them. They will not get hard and brittle. They're designed to be breathable. But I organize these bags in my large freezer so that I have, and they come in a multitude of colors. So I have 4 different colors so that the gray bags in my freezer have chicken in them, nothing else but chicken. I have another one that has nothing but beef in it. I have another one that has mixed meats. Anything that's not chicken or beef, it's in that bin. I have another one that has all sorts of vegetables in it. So that if I am going down to the freezer with a purpose to look for something, I know which bin I'm going to do. They have handles so I can lift them in and out of the freezer easily so that you can, and when things freeze, they get heavy because all those molecules now are compressed and hard and tight. They're heavier than when they were before. So if you've got a whole bag full of frozen meat, that feels like a lot, especially if you've got a roast or a ham or something like that. So these are great because you can lift it right out to see, oh, okay, look, I have another layer down underneath here. And I can fit 2 layers of these into my freezer so that they're a great thing to use. Other things that can work for you are everywhere you go, be it Dollar Tree or Dollar General, Walmart, everywhere, has plastic organizing containers. The same type you might use to organize your drawer or your kitchen cabinets. Find the size that works for you in your freezer and use those to organize your freezer with. So that if you've got a pull-out drawer freezer and your refrigerator's on the top and you look in there and it's like, where can I find things? If you do a layer of bins or a layer of plastic shoebox type containers that you can lift out, pull up, then you can say, okay, so this is all breakfast foods here, here's all vegetables. You can organize and know better where things are and where things aren't. It makes a whole lot of sense because just like you're going to organize your kitchen cabinets, your drawers, your freezer's got to stay organized or it becomes the dumping ground for everything. And that's your money in that freezer. Every time you open that freezer, you've got to remember, that's money that I went out and shopped for. I spent the time to put it into the freezer. I don't want it to go to waste. I want to use it. Especially when you're talking about your garden vegetables. If you're taking the time to grow that vegetable, put it into your freezer. Don't let it become lost in the abyss. You know, find the way, whatever organizing tool works for you. And what I always suggest is take the measurements of your freezer, of your space, before you go and look at a container. Or if you've got containers at home that you're using for something else, measure them to see if they fit in your space in your freezer. And then you know exactly what you're looking for when you go shopping. Because sometimes when you're seeing a container on a shelf, it looks a lot smaller or a lot larger than that space that you actually have. So save yourself time and energy, measure your space, test them out, and you will be very successful, trust me. Let's see, what else are we going to talk about? So you've got a whole freezer full of food. What are you going to do with it now? Eventually, you have to thaw it out. There are only 3 safe ways to thaw food. If you don't do these 3, don't tell me. That's all I got to say. So you're going to take food out of your freezer and put it into your refrigerator and let it thaw slowly there. You're going to take food out, such as that chicken breast that you saw. If I'm going to quickly thaw it, I'm going to put it into my microwave on the thawing setting that my microwave has, and I'm going to thaw it out because I'm going to cook it immediately. The only time I would use the microwave for thawing food is if I'm going to cook it immediately, because once you've put it into that microwave, those enzymes are jumping and hopping because they're moving. So if you then thaw it out and put it in your refrigerator, it's a ticking time bomb waiting to come back and bite your stomach, and you don't want that. So use the thawing feature on your microwave when you're going to use it right away, when you totally forgot that dinner was at 5 o'clock and you were busy with everything else. Yep, thaw it out. The other way is you can thaw with cold water. If you've got a large bowl, I can take that chicken breast and I can throw it into my bowl of ice cold water. It's got to be really cold. And I can only do that for about 2 hours, but in 2 hours it's going to be thawed out. So it doesn't matter that I don't need it to do it any longer. And I have a very large metal mixing type bowl, and I do exactly that. I'll throw my 3 chicken breasts right into it. They'll be thawed 30 minutes, and it's great to go. What if you're thawing something big, like a turkey or a ham or a giant roast? The other option for cold water still, use a cooler. It's a giant bowl. You can fill your cooler with ice and water, put that turkey right in there, make sure there's enough water and ice to cover that turkey. 24 hours, that turkey's going to be thawed. So you don't have to wait days and days to thaw the turkey. And somebody has always waited till the last minute to thaw their turkey, and that's probably me. So I throw it in my cooler very quickly. Just make sure after you've thawed meat in your cooler, you wash your cooler with soap and water. So you don't want those enzymes having a great time in your cooler, and later you find out, it's a mess. But always thaw quickly and correctly. And then remember that after it's been thawed, cook and use it within 2 days. Once it's cooked, then you still have more time that you can eat it. But you've got to cook it within 2 days, or you risk those enzymes really coming back and becoming unbearable bugs. Ultimately, your freezer is a great tool and a great asset. Use it the best you can and do it the way it works for you. If freezing everything individually is what's going to work for you at your house because you need small quantities, go with that. If you need to freeze in larger quantities, go with that. Do whatever works for you because it's your freezer. But make sure you use it safely, so follow the safety guidelines. There's lots of companies that have cute little freezer charts that remind you how long something should stay there and what to stay there. So now let's talk about vegetables. And I'm going to find my chair because my knee says it's the end of the day and we're kind of done. All right. So you've got a lot of vegetables coming up in your garden, and you need to know how to get them into the freezer. Well, the best thing to do is you've got to blanch those vegetables before you put them in the freezer, because blanching helps cut the enzymes. It helps stop them. It also helps any bacteria that might have been growing in your garden, because we all know the neighbor's cat wants to climb over your vegetables, and the birds like to give you a little showing of love. And so there are lots of different things that even when you bring your vegetables in and you wash them, they still might have a few other bacteria or germs. So blanching foods is important. And what you'll find in all of the freezer sections, and I have one printout from one of the safety handouts there that gives you, and this one here also has blanching tables, I think on the last page. And if you don't know how to blanch, blanching is easy. It means you're going to dunk it in hot water, boiling hot water. And for blanching, no, that's not the one I was thinking of. I thought it talked about blanching on that one. Somewhere it does. Oh, maybe that one doesn't. So it must be the one on the back that in the back that there's an article about blanching. And all of those books have charts on blanching in there. So that for soft foods, you want just a quick minute of it's going in boiling water, you take it out, you're dropping it into cold ice water for 2 to 3 minutes to stop that heat process, and then you're going to put it into your freezer container and put it into the freezer. Some foods like butternut squash, because it's a denser item. That you're going to blanch for a little longer. And all of those resources that are on here and in those books tell you exactly the times for thicker foods and thinner foods, but blanching is an important step. And if you think, no, I don't need to blanch it, I don't need it, it makes a lot of difference for how fresh that food's going to taste when it comes out of the freezer, because those enzymes have been doused, the bacteria is not there, it survives much better by blanching. Let's see. So in the long run, let's talk about this. Freezing eggs. I was in the grocery store once, and I happened to be there to buy eggs. And I came across two people who were having quite a debate about whether you could freeze eggs or you couldn't freeze eggs. And I just wanted to get my eggs and go home, really, truly, but I got caught in the debate because I freeze eggs. I've been freezing eggs. It's one of those things that the government gives you instructions on and says it's good. You cannot freeze an egg that's in a shell. That's a no-no, because bacteria becomes a problem. But if you take your egg out of the shell, then you can freeze them. The first thing is you've got to think about how are you going to use that egg. You can't freeze egg whites separately by themselves, or they turn to this gummy, gluey junk that is totally useless. This is the best thing. Ice trays, other silicone type trays that might be larger, muffin tins. A muffin tin is bigger, so it depends on the size of your eggs. If you have small eggs, these can work. Larger eggs, a muffin tin. Give it just a light spray with cooking spray or a brush with cooking oil. You're going to drop one egg into each muffin tin. Take your fork and just give it a little light mixing so that you've broken the yolk and it's mixed up. Don't whip it up, because then you've got air and bubbles and that's not going to defrost as well. So once you have that egg incorporated a little bit, then you're going to decide, what am I going to do with these eggs when I'm done? Because what you're going to do when they're done depends on how you're going to freeze it. If you're going to just use those eggs for baking, then you're going to put 1/8 of a teaspoon of sugar into each one of those, because the sugar helps to bind the egg properly so it won't become mushy and gooey when it's thawed out. If you're going to use it in savory items, such as if you're going to make quiche with them or scrambled eggs or any other real egg kind of dish, you want to put 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt instead. So you're either making sweet eggs or savory eggs. And if you have chickens and you have lots of eggs, or you have a neighbor who's giving you eggs, then you can make both. And you're going to then freeze them in whatever container you're freezing them in the muffin pan once it's hard, popping them out, putting them in the Ziploc bag, and labeling whether they're sweet eggs or savory eggs. When they thaw, they're perfect and wonderful, and you can throw them into cakes if they're the sweet ones. Anything that you would normally use a broken egg in, that's what you're going to do. And they're great. So if you ever get in the debate in the grocery store, yes, you can freeze eggs. You can tell them that. You can freeze eggs. Bread is an iffy kind of thing, because bread that we have today is not like bread we had yesterday. And we all moan and groan that that's not good bread. But if you're looking at freezing a loaf of sandwich bread that you bought at Walmart or Big Y, that's just a regular white sandwich bread, it's not going to have the greatest flavor afterwards that it had before. Homemade breads will definitely freeze the best. And why is that? Because they don't have all the extra preservatives and additives that sliced sandwich bread has. So if you make banana bread or zucchini breads or any of those, or if you make your own sourdough breads, those are going to freeze really well. Again, you want to think about how are you going to use it when you thaw it out. If you're only going to use 2 slices, it might sound crazy to you, but freeze them as 2 slices. And to do that, you're going to take your 2 slices, you're going to wrap it in parchment paper, then in some plastic wrap, and then put it into whatever bag you want to do it, be it a sealer bag, a zip top bag, and put that into the freezer. Make sure you label it, because now it's totally hidden and you do not know what it is in 6 months. But if 2 slices is all you use at a time, and you know, I only have sandwich bread 4 times a year, then you're going to do it in small quantities. Same for muffins. Put it into the freezer in a quantity that you want to be able to take out. Because when you take out a dozen muffins, and you really only wanted 2, the clock is ticking for how long those other 10 muffins are going to stay good. And you don't want to waste them, especially if you went to all the trouble of freezing them. So freeze breads in quantities that work. And that information is here in your handout for both the eggs, the bread, and milk. Cream, don't freeze cream. It separates horribly from the fat from the milk, and no matter how much you mix it, stir it, blend it, it's never going to be the same. It's never going to have the same properties. So no. Same as sour cream. Sour cream's on that no list. It just clumps and lumps. Cream cheese, yes, you can freeze cream cheese. If your plan is you want to be able to spread it on things later, don't freeze it. If you freeze cream cheese, it's really just good for baking and using in recipes, but it will do wonderfully. Butter, yes, you can freeze butter. I will freeze butter by taking a stick of butter and putting it onto my sheet so that I freeze all those sticks separately, and then I drop them into my bag so I can take one out at a time. But if you hit a great sale on butter and you've got freezer space, and we all know butter prices go sky high and then drop down, so if you hit a great sale and you can stock up, that's a good thing. Let's see, did we cover all our items? Oh, freezer meals, that's the last thing we're going to talk about. Someone asked about that. So anything you have for leftover that doesn't fall into the do not freeze category. So if you had a macaroni salad left from the picnic, don't put it in the freezer because it will be the gloppiest mess you ever saw because mayonnaise separates and mushes, and no, it's never going to work. But if you had, let's see, if you had shepherd's pie and you had leftover for that, that freezes wonderfully, and you could put it into a container that you want to use later. You could put it into a sealer bag, into a zippered bag, and that's going to work out wonderfully, that then later you can pull that out and there you've got a meal ready to go all over again, or that you can add something to. There are a lot of recipes out there in books, online, for people who make freezer meals, and that's where there are two types of freezer meals. Meals that are raw, ready to cook, and then meals that are cooked ahead of time and put into the freezer. So what I will do sometimes, especially beginning of the summer, I might take some chicken breast and put them into a bag and put my grilling seasonings and spices right on them, marinades right on there, zip those up and put them into the freezer, because then when I'm ready, all I have to do is take it right out and it's ready to go right on the grill. It's a quick step, it's easy. Same type of thing, if say you're cooking ground beef for taco night at your house, and you normally use a pound of ground beef. If you cook a second pound of ground beef, you can put half of it into the freezer. Now you've got ground beef that's already cooked for another meal. So that's planning for a freezer meal. Other meals are, people will make lasagnas that they put into their freezer, other casserole type deals. Those are great. You just have to make sure you've got space for them. And don't make the mistake of having your favorite meatloaf pan that you make meatloaf in and you put it into the freezer, and then a week later you're looking for that meatloaf pan thinking, where is it? Oh, it's in the freezer with the meatloaf. Wait, I didn't think that through, did I? I better check that out. Some people will use aluminum type of pans that are disposable for freezer meals. You can also find very inexpensive, we do chicken pot pie and a few other pot pie type things. But I go to Job Lot and Dollar Tree and I buy their very inexpensive metal pie pans, because then later when you go to cut them, it doesn't fall apart like an aluminum one will. And because I paid $2 for that pan, it's okay if it sits in my freezer for a couple of months, because my good ones I know they're waiting for me to bake other things. So different tools will work good for you for if you like to do freezer meals. When I worked full-time, I would plan at least once a month that I would spend a couple of hours making some meals to throw into the freezer, because it was great to be able to come home and take something out that goes straight into the oven, and you know, that's a nice simple thing, and if you have got freezer space for it, it's great. I think that is all I have. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.